put on this. Hi there, everybody. I am Jocelyn Brewer, and today is our very first Ask Me Anything about digital wellbeing, a live coaching call that I'm going to do every month, basically just to do a bit of outreach, have a little bit of a chat with parents all around the world. I have people registered from, all different places today, and go through some questions that have been posed to me. So I'm just going to start by acknowledging that I am here on Wongal land, that I am the beneficiary of the dispossession of First Nations Aboriginal Australians here in Sydney, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, especially as we do work around families and kinship and the importance of those ties, to recognise the importance of country and culture to First Nations people. So let's have a little kick off. I need to, I guess, make a little disclaimer here that the advice I'm giving in these sessions is general in nature. It's not intended to replace that of a primary treating physician, a doctor, a psychologist, or anything like that. So you'll see that the questions are quite broad. So please just kind of take what you need. They are suggestions, they're not gospel. Sometimes these things don't necessarily work in with what your family would do. So yeah, just kind of take it with a grain of salt. For privacy, we're going to talk about some cases. I've got somebody live with me tonight, as well as the questions that were submitted earlier. We won't be sharing any like specifics. So, identifiable people, schools or organizations. And I'm going to share this online. You'll be able to access it for about a month. So let's do it. The first question that came through was from Mary, and she's with us tonight. We're going to have a chat in a minute about consequences and how you approach a teenager who breaks the rules but then won't actually, submit to the consequences. So, Mary, do you want to tell us a little bit more, if you're still there? Tell us a bit more about the teenager that is breaking rules, what rules are being broken, and what consequences are being attempted.
Okay, so 16-year-old boy, and great kid, but when he's in front of the screen, he's like a demon. So
he's very focused, is what you mean.
The main things are breaking the rules of things like staying on it way too long when we've agreed on a time that we're supposed to come off. And the second thing that's a really big thing is swearing at the moment. So he's engaging with his friends, and there's a lot of behaviour that I don't, of course, I don't condone and I'm not comfortable with. And then when we try to broach it, it's kind of, World War III. So it's about, having consequences. The thing is, it's really hard, because you try to put in consequences, but what consequences do you give a 16-year-old? People say, "Oh, just take the computer off them," but it's that also comes with consequences as well. So it's a really hard one, and the older they get, the more they kick back.
Yes. So absolutely, and the consequences really depend on their age. And as you know, having older sons as well, once they're earning their own money, once they're 18, things really change and you have less kind of traction and the ability to leverage their behavior. And I guess we're looking at two things here, because consequence can be either natural consequences, like, okay, you're choosing to spend that time gaming. You haven't then listened to me around, making sure you put time aside to do your geography assignment. That's now late and you're going to fail. That's a natural consequence, which they may or may not care about. There's some different situations and consequences where they kind of have to learn by doing. And then there's those applied consequences. So obviously in a long weekend, if you drove very fast on a speed, on the highway and were speeding and got caught, you'd lose double demerit points. There's very, very clear consequences. But when it comes to kids, yes, taking the device away is not going to work very well, because they need it for, doing that geography assignment or whatever. So we need to work out what that pain point is without actually inciting them to take more risky behaviors, because sometimes when you actually come down really strictly, they're going to go to other, I guess, like limits to try and get that need met. So what I think we need to do there is actually work out what the needs are that are being met through that gameplay, and work out, I guess, then what we can do to like, what is the sweet spot of how much gaming is okay, and can we kind of reverse engineer so that some of the things are done first and then the gaming sits later, and then we're protecting sleep and some of those things that we talk about generally. So this is kind of a long way around then coming up with, well, what would he see as a fair consequence? Can he actually think about, when I'm swearing and I'm really rude, or I break something, or I'm aggressive, what would be the fair applied consequence to put into place there? And actually being able to identify that when he's calm and having a really calm conversation nowhere near the actual behavior. So if you try and have a conversation about swearing in games right after you've asked him to stop swearing and he's told you to go and F off, then is not a good time to have the conversation. You actually want to kind of find some space and say, hey, we really need to sit down and talk about that in a way that we can just be really civil and get to an agreement on it. So because most kids are quite reasonable, it's just when they're in the middle of it all that they get really tricky. Can I ask what?
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's interesting you should say that, because that's exactly what he says to me. Now's not the time to talk to me about it because I'm really mad.
Yeah. So absolutely, when kids are mad, basically their brain, if we use that handy brain model of this is the kind of fight, flight, freeze, the amygdala, and this is the thinking brain. When they're mad, the thinking brain has gone off, it's flipped out, and this is activated. And in fact, this is kind of like talking to a shaken up snow dome. Their brain is like, I just want you to get out of my way and let me have my game. Whereas, and then they go into probably a shame spiral if they do break something, they break the console or they punch the wall or they, whatever might happen, then they go, oh no. When this switches back on, they go into, oh, what did I do? How embarrassing. And the shame of that, then how do we escape the shame? We go back into the game, because that's where we feel connected, in control and competent.
And that does happen. There's definitely that remorse and the apologies, but then it happens all over again. Yeah. So it's this perpetual circle of the behavior just coming back again, even though you've said you're sorry, but it happens all over again.
Yeah. So what we need to do then is have that conversation once it's calm, to say, next time this is happening, what can we do? So the escalation from sort of green zone to orange zone to red zone, if we're trying to manage the behavior in red, it's always going to go to hell in a handbasket. But if we can notice when he's escalating, so usually they kind of hype up and the swearing really kicks in. Now, depending on your values, swearing about something, I think some swear words are effing brilliant for describing things when you're enthusiastic. But when you're swearing at people, about people, using misogynistic language, that's where everything shifts around. So you might have to have a really specific conversation about, when I start hearing you talk like that, I know that you're actually getting into this really escalated state where you're then more likely to be that person that you keep apologizing for. Do I have permission to coach you when I notice that? Is there like a keyword or a signal? Not, oh, I think you're getting into the red zone, but can you go, I don't know, bubblegum ice cream? And he goes, oh, okay, noted. It's not embarrassing. He can then think about, what do I need to do to regulate? I need to tone myself down. I need to signal to my friends, I've only got 10 minutes left of playing. Some of those functional things that he can actually do to notice, if I don't shift my behavior now, I'm going to escalate, and then we're going to get into one of those Barneys. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. And that's very workable, I think, to be able to do that.
And get him to go into, how you feel so crap when you kind of failed to regulate your behavior, and we get into those arguments, how you say you're really sorry and you want to do things differently. we don't expect you to be able to solve your problems on your own and just magically come up with this. So I'm there to coach you and be your kind of additional eyes and ears to where this behavior goes, because I can see the patterns that you can't see because you have an underdeveloped brain and I have a fully developed brain. And for those people who might be watching, Mary, you probably have heard me say this a lot before, but it's that headlamp analogy. So kids kind of feel like, oh, I've got this little sense of my future, and it's like they've got a little miner's torch on their head and they can see a little bit of the impact. I know what's going on. I've got this. Whereas we had floodlights. And so we can see the impact of, you know, aggression, ongoing habits of gaming a little bit longer and longer and longer each day, and that eating into sleep. We can see the impacts of that, whereas they can't. And so we're kind of just being there, you know, their floodlights and trying to meet halfway. We also can't do an insight transplant where we, as, you know, often women, but, you know, in our 40s and beyond, trying to get them to understand and have the insights transplanted into their brain that we have, that are literally the product of our age and gender to some degree. So the consequence question is something that I get asked all the time, because increasingly parents don't have a tool to leverage. We in past generations literally just had the shit scared out of us by our parents because they
That's so true.
right. So
Yeah,
because we don't say, if you're not home by this time, you're going to get the belt, or you're going to get whatever, like a physical, you know, threat. We kind of don't have anything. They don't even drive cars and do some of the things that we did, which we sort of relied on our parents for, and we had to kind of do the good PR. So we've lost that kind of stickiness. And what it does is becomes an intrinsic motivator. So those natural consequences then need to be more sticky. Like, if I don't do well at school, my chances of getting that career and having that life diminish. And do I want to trade that off? Is that worth the risk? And that's where, in a lot of my work, we start talking about future self. What do I actually want in my future? Who do I want to be? And can I've literally, like, was laid onto the call because I'm working with a year 12 kid who, you know, we literally just, she can't be using social media for 90 minutes a day and not getting enough sleep, or believing that she doesn't have enough time to go to sleep earlier, and wanting to get 98 in the HSC. Like, it doesn't compute. So sometimes it's actually just explaining those natural consequences and asking them to think about, you know, a choice point. Which road do you want to go down? And having that in a really calm way, not related to the activity, regularly. Like, oh, you wanted to do that course, or you're interested in being that thing. I saw this article about somebody who'd done that career, and really bringing to life their future selves in daily conversation. So it helps then build out that, oh yeah, I've got to make a choice because that's what I really want. So we want to get sticky with our sense of selves in the future. How does that sound? Is there anything else that you wanted to ask?
No, you've answered that beautifully. Thank you. That's exactly, and that's the point that you made about consequences. Like, we don't know what to apply as a consequence. And it's a 16-year-old kid who's a really good kid, and it's just a few little annoying things that kind of, you know, worry me, and I just don't know how to fix it. So you've given me some great insight there. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. The other thing about the language, you could even like really talk about the role of language, and talk about, you know, like why we use swear words, the expressive elements. You could talk about, like, what do you really want to say? Like, while I'm sort of half joking to say, you know, the F word can be really expressive.
Yeah, and I agree. And we're not, it's not as if we're like, you can't say, like, you know, we don't have an issue with, you know, expressing yourself and so forth. And it's not, it's certain words that he says, and certain things that are kind of like at a level above, where, like a level beyond where, you know, it's crossing the line.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and so the general swearing doesn't worry us. Like, you get frustrated, you know, a word comes out, that's okay, I get that. But when like you said, when I hear name calling, or if I hear it in a misogynistic kind of tone or anything like that. It's like, oh, you're really stepping the line. And it's my job as a parent to kind of pull him back, because I don't want my kids growing up with those kind of ideas.
Absolutely. And for them to actually know what the word is that they're saying. So, you know, the C word gets bandied around a lot by young men. And when you sort of stop and say, do you know what that is referring to biologically, and get them to look at the kind of basis of the word, they're quite shocked and horrified, because it's been shifted and molded into this kind of derogatory term and this label, and I effing say, you know, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, out to me, it's the a version of the N word in Australia. Like, I just don't go there. So having conversations about like what that means, and even what misogyny means, because for a lot of boys, they don't experience it. They don't see it, how that has a real world impact. So in my newsletter a little while ago, Maybelline, the makeup brand, did a brilliant, really short video where they got two guys to put voice filters on that made them sound like girls. And they went into a game, and as soon as they started to speak, everyone started piling on and being really misogynistic. And these gamers were like, what? How can people treat us like this just because we're speaking with a female voice? And there were two female gamers there saying, yeah, we actually don't talk in games because of how we're treated. So even showing young men a video like that, I think, is really powerful for them to step back from what they think is fun and games and, you know, mateship, into how might we be offending literally half of the population. So lots of really interesting things like that. When I share out the video, I'll put a link to the Maybelline little promo into that. So thank you for coming on and participating tonight. It's lovely to chat to you. We'll move on to the next question. Distractions and regulation. How do we teach teens to regulate their distraction from games and YouTube on their devices while they're doing schoolwork? So look, the practical thing here is, when you're on a device that literally, I talk about it like one big bowl. You have a bowl that has broccoli in it and chocolate in it. And we're literally asking kids, please just go and eat the broccoli and don't touch the chocolate. It's really hard to pick apart all of those bits and pieces. So to do that, we either want two different containers. Here's your broccoli. So it might be that a laptop versus a tablet or a phone. But increasingly, it's actually about the parental control software. And this doesn't necessarily need to be like even the parental stuff, but it could be an app like Freedom, which I use myself on particular times where I know I'm going to procrastinate. I know I'm going to check Twitter and participate in, you know, Twitter threads about, I don't know, statistics or something nerdy. Rather than do the thing that I need to. So first and foremost, you can use parental controls and software and apps and things like that to actually manage. All right, you've got to do your homework between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Therefore, we're going to block you out of some of the things that we know are distracting, for instance, YouTube. Lots of kids tell me, oh, I just need it on in the background. I can't concentrate unless I have a YouTuber playing something. I call BS on that, because ultimately what we're aiming towards is young people doing exams and being able to perform under exam conditions. Usually that's the main form of assessment that we have for, you know, most of our academia. And you can't have your earpods in, you can't be having, you know, music and stuff on when you're in exams. So we don't want to prime young people to getting used to that. We also want to use the out of sight, out of mind kind of plan there, that phones are usually distracting just from being there. Just having my phone sitting there and I can see my family texting me and I'm ignoring all of their texts for the next half an hour, then kind of disrupts and distracts me. You might have actually seen, like, I've got my stuff coming through on my phone too, and I've got some important messages popping through and I'm like, and you can probably see my brain go into that, right? So you can imagine, again, a young person, underdeveloped brain, where their entire friendship group is sitting in a, you know, Snapchat message thread going, I don't want to do maths. I'm just going to have a cheeky check. So getting it away and creating a digital foyer can be really, really helpful. So that basically means, you know, a docking station or somewhere that you'd have to go downstairs to the kitchen. and things like that, making them log out of YouTube or log out of some of their actual apps. So you have to log back in. That creates some friction to make it a little bit more difficult. But then from a kind of cognitive perspective, we want to actually teach them about their brain. So we want to teach them about cognitive load. Your brain cannot attend to all of these sources of information all at once. It's just doing lots and lots of quick switching, and switching tasks creates like a drain on our cognitive processes. So we want to actually teach monotasking. We want to teach value in being able to do one thing deeply, not lots of things in a very shallow way. We also want to teach them about self-control. And that's what I was talking to Mary about before, about connecting with that future self. Self-control, my master's thesis looked at, aspects of self-control is really, it's not just about saying, I won't do that thing. It's about, that instant gratification thing. It's about saying, I won't do that instant gratification thing because there is something in the future that is more juicy and delicious that I want, instead of being in that Snapchat group chat right now. Okay. So until they understand some of those soft skills, those emotional intelligence kind of skills that are literally being hacked into through the nature of tech design, that then, information is power. Again, the young person that I was talking to this evening, I was like, do you understand that there's a different algorithm for kids in China than there is for the kids in the West? And that algorithm is designed to get your eyeballs away from the stuff that really matters to you. They tried to tell me that they were watching study talk and that made it all okay. Cool. There's some good content on TikTok, but generally, we want to really think about that time that you've just spent on that device is time that you now cannot spend sleeping, exercising, studying, whatever that might be. So really teaching some of those skills will help them understand to regulate something. We know that if you understand it better, if you understand your brain better, you understand how things work, then you are more likely then to follow the kind of rules that we put in place, because you go, yeah, that makes sense. If you don't understand things like the displacement hypotheses, even though there's nuance in that, then you won't go, oh yeah, 24 hours in the day, I want to protect sleep because sleep is really, really important for my mood, my metabolism, and my memory. So teaching regulation sometimes requires removal or restriction, but it also requires information and empowerment. So then they can kind of then think about those natural consequences of distraction, and literally that the brain is a muscle, and our focus and concentration is something we really need to hone a bit. Our next question is about screens for leisure versus learning. And this, I guess, flows on really nicely from the previous question. It comes from somebody who's working in a distance education setting. So I recently spoke to all of the kind of Australasian distance learning educators. And it's asking, how do we go about setting guidelines and recommendations for screen time, both educationally and recreationally in a distance ed setting? So obviously in distance ed, you are absolutely, even more than any other setting, relying on internet connectivity for learning. And what's really interesting, obviously, to kind of go back and look at traditional screen time recommendations is that they are all about recreation. They're not about education. They kind of say, oh no, the educational stuff, that's not having an impact. Which again, I kind of have called out for a long time as being problematic, because sitting in front of a laptop, often like this, shoulders up, hunched back, I see lots and lots of young people on the trains, or well, lots of people anywhere, but like the tech neck aspect of what's going on here, and things like that are having impacts. We know, like even from the perspective of our eyes and our eye health, that using screens narrows our focus of vision. And when we have that narrowing, generally what's happening when we're narrowing is that it has a different biological impact, I guess, to being looking up and around and having your eye on the horizon and all of those kinds of things. So I guess the answer here is a little bit about the previous question. We also want to think about how we set up devices to have that different access. So like I was saying, you know, a bowl of broccoli and a bowl of the sweet treats and the fun. Not to make all learning be broccoli, like broccoli needs to be a lot more, learning needs to be more than just broccoli. We want to throw in all of the rainbow of vegetables, so to speak. But there might be a way that in some families, really a laptop is quite boring, that it's locked down, and again, using those control features so that it has a really nuanced and specific use. And then we can kind of move kids around different devices for different particular activities. I would love some of the online learning to actually still really, look, it varies from place to place. No two schools are the same, even within distance education setting, where there's a lot more emphasis still on handwriting, because again, in the HSC and even the VCE, they're not typing for the essays and the exam conditions. We really still need to get kids handwriting. But really being able to practice those gear shifts and mental transitions, and transitions is something we're going to talk about in a second. That transition from, I guess, the different subjects and then the different devices, so that we're actually trying to use different zones for different activities. So, for example, I don't think any learning should happen in a bed. It's a different type of learning, maybe when kids are a little bit older, but, you know, beds are for sleeping. We don't want to get devices into beds. Now, for where kids might have a bedroom that they study in, setting up a desk. So what I try and usually do, you're not going to be able to see the background, but I've kind of got 3 zones within my office. There's the therapy zone, or even my meditation zone, where I'm sitting on a chair and I'm talking to somebody, or I'm meditating before I see the person. There's the desk that I'm at right now, which is where I use my laptop and I do all of my computer-based work. And then over there, I've got a little round table where I write up my case notes. I do my professional reading. I might, you know, scribble out ideas and things like that. So we want to practice and create some different zones so that we can actually have that, what Adam Fraser would talk about, the third space. We can have some different shifts between that. In terms of actual screen time, most of my work is about why we shouldn't talk about screen time as a metric, but actually get into what's the context, what's the content, what's the function, and what are the cognitions. So we want to be kind of fluid around the time and really look at how we're breaking the day up. You know, how do we socialize, for instance? How are we taking breaks? Are we, you know, making sure that we're rolling our shoulders and blinking and looking at things around us, rather than sitting on screens hunched over for hours and hours on end? It's very, I guess it's just an extension of what we would do with the technology use agreement course that I run, but really looking at it from the perspective of online learning. And even for adults who spend a lot of time, like me, half my life is very much leisure versus learning. It's not so much leisure online anymore. The next question is all about babies and screen exposure. I absolutely love this question. And I'm working on revamping my screens in early childhood course, because it really gets me as a mum of a not so little one anymore, how many parents I do see kind of with kids holding, you know, little ones, even with like holders and clips and stuff, having phones and a lot of stuff in their face really early. So how do I navigate my fear of my baby developing heavy attraction towards devices? So there's a couple of things. First of all is just being conscious of how you use your phone and devices and the impact of your use and its interference in language acquisition. So again, even that little image that I found there, how we get distracted and everything can be quite important. And the signal that, you know, doing that and putting a phone in front of the interaction. Oh, you're so cute. Let me take a photo. Oh, you're so cute. Let me, you know, interrupt that call and response. Again, natural to want to take photos of your kid, but if you're constantly interrupting that with either your own phone use, I've just got to fix this email, I've just got to do this thing, you know, really kind of thinking about the impact on that relationship and being able to use your phone in discreet kind of ways would be really valuable. What it shows too, I've put a little link down the bottom, and this will be in the email that goes out. The youngest kid or youngest human ever to give a TED talk was little Molly Wright. I think she was about 7 at the time. And she talked all about this, about Thrive Before 5 and the Minderoo Foundation's work on early childhood, which really looks at it's called the still face experiment. So what happens when a little baby, and we're all for the baby stuff, what happens when we actually just go still faced and we don't respond? And the baby's still trying to get our attention and interact, and what would it be like if me presenting was really monotone, that I just read my slides, maybe I need to tone it down a bit, but I didn't gesticulate and talk in the way that I did. So that still face experiment really, rather than us like not actually, withdrawing, we do that. And that potentially has the same impact. We want to get really good at analog play and prioritizing this in embodied play. And I think some of us have just forgotten how to play. We don't really know how to engage little ones. We really want to do it in an embodied way. We want blocks. We want to build things. We want to make a mess. We want to use our bodies. We want to be able to run and climb and build all that proprioception, which is really, really important. It's an absolutely foundational skill, and you cannot replicate it on an iPad. So while an iPad or a tablet or whatever can be really, really valuable for enhancing learning or getting your phonics or a little bit of entertainment or buying you some time as a parent, you cannot learn to climb. You cannot learn to kick a ball. You cannot give real life hugs and that tactile kind of aspect of things. So we want to get good at play. And my course goes into like how to not forget to play. Because the childhood is so quick. Your kids grow up so quickly and you go, where's my little bubbaloo? And then we're dealing with the teenagers that Mary was talking about suddenly. We want to give meaningful access to online activities very slowly. So things like, and in the new screen time kind of guidelines, it's about things like video chats with grandparents where you can. And again, little ones are not getting into big kind of conversations. It's just about this is what it does. We really want to make sure that ultimately kids are going to be really attracted to devices, right? Like that's just part of, and they model it really quickly. I remember my kid just getting like a thing like this and going, oh, I'm on my phone. And even when she started to draw, she would draw a phone and say, I'm on my phone. Now, I don't walk around using my phone like that very often, but it was just modeled really quickly. So I think what we want to do is like, yes, it's bright and shiny and they're going to want it, but being really, really careful with when we actually serve it up. That we get really organized at things like going to places. I still do it with my 6-year-old. I don't go anywhere without a coloring book or a notepad, a pen, and a bunch of coloring in pencils. And once we've done some of that stuff, we even go to like some of the outdoor pubs and clubs where there's like in old bowling clubs and things, we take a ball. And so she'll go and say, I've got a ball, who wants to play? And so using all of those things before you go to, and there are times where I say, please sit down and just watch an episode of Bluey, or please sit down and do some reading eggs, right? But I go to that as a top shelf reward. I don't go to that as you're bored after 3 minutes and you're telling me I'm bored. So I go, I don't want my kid to be bored. Quick, I better give them something to do. We actually want to teach them to be bored in healthy ways. So how you introduce screens slowly, but not making it something that is so special that they're kind of craving it. You actually just want to go, oh yeah, my phone, it doesn't do anything. It goes to bed, right? My phone goes to bed and it doesn't work. Or my phone, you can tell them all sorts of fibs when they're little. About, like the internet goes off. In my house, the internet goes off from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Just doesn't work. So think about how you can introduce that to not make it something like so salacious that they've never seen, but is just a normal part of daily life that sits in a really particular spot. I like this one too. This is about, I guess, reversing access. I was hoping the person who asked this question would be online tonight because I really want to clarify a bunch of questions that I have around this example. So a 9-year-old created an Instagram account, I presume without the parents' permission, and they don't know how to solve this as unplugging has backfired. Yes, unplugging, I think, is tricky, if not impossible, once kids have seen it and we use it and it's integrated in our family life. Reversing access can be really tricky, and we need to get a really clear plan around how to do that. I teach that in my tech use agreement course, because usually people are coming to it with like, the wheels have fallen off, the phones are more important than the family pet. How do we get like our humanity as a family back? So it's not impossible, but absolutely unplugging is tricky. It's really about putting technology back in its place. So what I would like to know is, like, how did you discover that they had their own Instagram account? What device were they using that? So to me, that sort of says they maybe have unmonitored use. Maybe they have their own phone or tablet. They're obviously quite savvy. How did you find out about it? And then what conversations were had? Like, did you then say, you are not having this ever again? And then going, oh my gosh, but now like we're going on a plane trip and I need you to use your, like, you're going to drive me crazy for 7 hours if you don't have it. What did the little person say? Like, why did you need it? Was it they were like, everybody else has it and I wanted to be cool too, and I knew you'd say no? How did that come to happen? Had you had some conversations where you said, no, you can't have Instagram till you're 13, and they thought, well, screw you, I'm going to go and make my own account? What were the consequences? So did you say, well, you can, you're grounded off the internet or whatever, which is absolutely what people would say straight away, right? The first thing as parents is, well, that thing is going to go away and you're not going to have access, until again, we come around to going, that access to that thing in a healthy context specific way is very useful. So I guess what I'd be asking there is, how can you mentor and monitor their usage to keep them safe and learning to use technology in that kind of healthy, safe, savvy way, right? They're my kind of two main words, safe and savvy. So, there's ultimately, everything comes with risk, but we're minimizing the risk. We're keeping you as safe as possible, but we're being smart with how we use it. And not just like, smart, but really clever. We're thinking really broadly and creatively about where technology sits, and we're creating our own solutions to what works for our family and our values. Okay. So that's kind of what I'd ask about there. And depending, if that person was here, we'd have particular answers and information to that. Ultimately, as a parent, you can say, you are not 13. It is not appropriate, not condoned, and in fact, is creating fraud for you to have an Instagram account. You have lied to Instagram. You have lied to Mr. Zuckerberg about your age. You have committed some level of fraud in order to access that. And the reason that it's 13 is your brain is not ready. How can I mentor you to get ready and have some access to meet those needs in a way that is appropriate to a 9-year-old? But ultimately saying, I wouldn't necessarily unplug, I would say delete the account. You cannot have an account, right? You can use my account, or we can set up an account together. You can actually, on the Instagram app, like, add accounts. I had at 1.5 accounts. Do not recommend that, but add another account that you set up together, that it can only be used with you on your phone. You don't have to be looking over their shoulder, but ultimately, if you've curated what they're following, and then you have conversations about what they're following, and you can apply the 3 M's of digital nutrition, which are mindful, meaningful, and moderate. So mindful in what you're using, meaningful in what you're following and what you're interacting with. It has meaning and purpose, and moderate in terms of its moderate level of use. So time is always a factor, but not the only factor that we're looking at. Transitioning off screen time. I meant to get the new book down, Raising Boys Who Like Themselves by Casey Edwards and her husband, Dr. Christopher Scanlon. Lovely book that goes with raising girls who like yourself or who like themselves. Really lovely attitudes to technology. And there's a section in that about transitioning off screen time that I contributed to. So how do you get kids off apps like TikTok? They feel like drug addicts when you try and take it away. I would challenge the drug addicts thing. I would say it's like any human who had something snatched off them. If you were sitting in a restaurant and a waiter came along, and sometimes they do this, you're not quite finished or you're just taking a break and they come and, you know, swoop your plate away, you'd be like, wait, no, give that back to me. And certainly if you are halfway through eating a piece of cake and your plate got, you know, taken, you would respond in a particular way. And I think we have to recognize that often as parents, we are on a very different time frame, like a kind of timeline to young people, because humans are ultimately really bad at estimating time. That's why the screen time research is in such a schmozzle, is it often requires young people, of all the people, to estimate the amount of time that they've spent online. I would challenge most adults to accurately assess and estimate how long they spend doing things, either in the planning stage or in the retrospective stage, like how long has this conversation gone for, or how long did you sleep last night, or what time is it now? We're not very good at. So I give examples like we want to train kids into understanding that, like how long is a Bluey episode? 7 minutes. So when my kid says, can I have time on the iPad? I'm like, well, usually it's about 20 minutes. And that equates to things like an Odd Squad episode, or a game of Fortnite is 20 to 25 minutes. So if you know that, you can say, well, you have time for one game of Fortnite. If they're playing open worlds or persistent worlds where there's no start and end point, then saying, you know, an amount of time really isn't very helpful, because it's hard then to know what the end point is because there's no end to the game. So if you're building something amazing in Roblox or Minecraft, or you're in an activity that doesn't have a natural conclusive endpoint, then it's really, really tricky then for when you say, okay, 1 more minute, for them to wrap up everything they're doing and then come off. Because what they're doing in real life is kind of like on the game is kind of like if you were playing in Play-Doh with Play-Doh and then you suddenly said, okay, I want you to smash that all right now and get rid of it. It's not even like in some games that you can leave it there and come back to build it later. Again, totally depends on what game they're playing. If we're talking about apps like TikTok, all those videos will be there. The For You page is constantly changing as people add new content and things go viral, and they're prioritizing different types of content. But ultimately, we talk about a lot about this in games, is phasing out of the screen time and into some green time. Now, not everybody, I'm conscious that, you know, I live in a capital city where increasingly we live in high-rise developments and high-density developments where there is not green time that you can just run into your backyard and, you know, kick a ball around or jump on the trampoline, because in the area that I live in, they've probably built a granny flat in that backyard. So yes, you can go down to the local park, but again, we probably don't run down to the local park and participate in green spaces in the same way that, you know, I took myself off to the park and things in the 80s and 90s. So what we want to think about there is just going to get physical. Like, can you do some star jumps? Can you run around the house? Can you go and do something that embodies, again, I'm using that word embody, gets you out of up here and these and into your physicality, into using your whole body in a really positive way. Hopefully with screen time, we've already, before you've gotten into the screen, that you've actually had some time to do exercise and movement for that day. So generally we would look at the 24 hours in the day. You've got to have a chunk of sleep, a developmentally appropriate amount of sleep. Then you want to have the time for school and doing all the stuff. And then you want to have time for exercise. And then screen time sits in the gap that's left over. Okay. So you're going to find that maybe kids can balance that screen time better if they've already had some exercise. And certainly, you know, they need to transition into a really specific activity. You can't just get off and go, okay, that's over. Right. They need to kind of And again, depending on what they're doing, TikTok, like literally 15-second videos, you might actually need to have a time limit. So you say, I say to my kid 20 minutes, but then we have a fade out warning. So I set it at 17 minutes. And then she basically gets another 5. So I'm tricking her and I'm rewarding her a little bit there, but she gets the 17-minute warning. That's, you know, time is up, and now you get another 5 minutes, and then it's a hard out. So in the last bit of the hard out, I'm saying, hey, and actually I've got a video that I should include. I filmed having this negotiation with her the other day where I was like, hey, that second alarm's gone off. That means we really need to wrap it up. And you get about 30 seconds where we say, hey, you know, we're not going to have a tizzy about it. I know that it's really fun. Let's be really grateful we've had fun with our, you know, she's really into this unicorn game that flies, and all of that sort of stuff. You've done really well today. It'll be so fun to come back and build those skills tomorrow. And she generally goes, oh, okay. Right. So giving her those warnings. The other thing that I have that I don't have here, but they're quite big, is egg timers. So I've got a 1 minute, a 3 minute, and a 5 minute egg timer. And so they're quite large, and I flip them over and I go, okay, 5 more minutes or whatever, right? So that we're actually giving her a sense of how to estimate her time, and it's visual. So you can look up and you go, oh, I'm nearly out of time. So that's my one for transitioning off screens. Are there any other burning questions? Probably not, because there's no one popped up in the chat. I'm sure there will be other ones. I'm going to do the next one in 4 weeks from today, July the 12th, and I'll send that out through my networks so that you can register and send your questions through. You can work with me in lots of different ways. I do consults with schools where we talk about how do we deploy policy and how do we kind of make these safe and smart schools that are digitally well. Parent webinars, usually booked via schools, that I run and host, and there's a few different topics there. I do parent coaching, like one-on-one in small groups or with the parents face-to-face in Sydney and online. And on the shop page of my website, you'll find a whole bunch of courses and other things. So thank you so much for joining me for my first Ask Me Anything. I will be running it monthly. I appreciate your time, and I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.